probability supposes that if you toss a coin 100 times, chances for heads and tails are equal. However, none of about 50 attempts on Adolf Hitler's life had been a success.
Assassination attempts on Hitler began long before he came to power. As early as 1921, there were attempts to kill him. There were incidents where his car was fired on. There was one incident where a bomb was planted at a rally in which he was speaking. There were probably at least a half a dozen incidents in the 1920s where people attempted to kill him.
In 1923, during the failed Nazi coup, better known as the Beer Hall Putsch, they shot at Hitler at 3 meters distance.
When the police opened fire on the stormtroopers and Hitler's supporters, he was on the verge of death. 14 people got killed, many wounded, and Nazi got killed and fell down, shielding Hitler with his body.
During World War I, Hitler gained the character of a lucky one already.
And he was serving at the front. He was a brave one as a soldier. Later on, they tried to humiliate him by spreading rumors of his cowardice and faked medals. Though Hitler was a monster of cruelty in world history, no need to make a wrongful accusation against him. He was awarded 2 Iron Crosses, besides the Bavarian Order.
According to eyewitnesses, dozens of times the bombs went off in close proximity to Hitler. He happened to be under machine gun fire and survived, yet twice wounded. One might say he seemed a lucky one somehow. But mathematically, chances of his survival since 1914 to 1945 were next to nil. 1 out of 50 trillion.
Play of chance is of great importance in history. The fact can't be discarded. Had Hitler been killed, who knows what fate could have awaited Europe. Speaking of the attempts on Adolf Hitler's life, he happened to get away with it one way or another.
Sitteth in the temple of God, shewing himself as God, and that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Berlin, the autumn of 1937. In the garden of the Imperial Reich Chancellery, Hitler held a secret briefing.
Hitler told his top commanders, didn't ask them, he told them that he intended to launch war against Austria and Czechoslovakia, perhaps as early as the coming year.
It would be the first steps in the conquest of living space, on which depends the future of Germany itself. Aviation General Goering and Admiral Raeder had supported Hitler's plans. War Minister Field Marshal Blomberg, Commander of Ground Forces General von Fritsch, and Foreign Minister Mayrat were against it.
most of the senior officers and the general staff were very concerned about a war because they thought that a war against Czechoslovakia was a war that Germany couldn't win for a variety of reasons. First of all, the Czechs had the strongest army in Central Europe.
Czechoslovakia had a treaty with France. The treaty stated very clearly that if Germany invaded Czechoslovakia, the French would come to their aid. Czechoslovakia also had a treaty with the Soviet Union, but the Soviet treaty said the Soviets would not be involved unless the French did.
Hitler was a daring and audacious gambler. His first major military adventure was the capture of the Rhineland. March 1936, reunion of the Rhineland and the Reich. At Hitler's command, the German soldiers, drumming and tooting, had taken over the former German territory, the Rhineland, cut off from Germany by the Versailles Treaty. It was an illegitimate and audacious action, just in case the German officers and soldiers had an order to retreat in case of intervention by France. However, France did not intervene. At his southern Germany ranch, Hitler exclaimed, "Good God, I'm glad everything went without a hitch. The world belongs to the brave." If the French had invaded Rhineland, we would have had to flee in disgrace. We did not have enough men, even for the appearance of resistance. Hitler began to expand the living space for Germany. The political elite and the generals were panicking. They feared retaliation. But Hitler's animal instinct unerringly predicted that the West will remain silent.
Hitler probably was at that time the only leading German who believed that the British and French would not move against Germany. Hitler recognized it. The German army has a history. He demanded this of the army early on, that they swear an oath directly to him, because they didn't swear allegiance to Germany. They swore it personally to Hitler. "I swear by God this holy oath that I will render to Adolf Hitler, Führer of the German Reich and people, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, unconditional obedience, and that I am ready as a brave soldier to risk my life at any time for this oath."
Hitler's aide-de-camp, Colonel von Bülow, recalled, January 30th, 1938. We gathered to look at the torchlight procession from the balcony of the Reichschancellery. Hitler saluted marching columns, but I felt shocked. I was thinking of how many, seeing my depression. My wife felicitously remarked, "You look like you're going to be sick."
Commander-in-Chief von Fritz, War Minister Blomberg, and Foreign Minister von Meyrath had been removed from posts. Chief of Staff Berg had resigned commission in protest at the approaching war. All those somehow opposed to war were either dismissed or made away. It was necessary for Hitler to be sure nobody blocked his way of unleashing a big war.
Hitler considered himself the greatest revolutionary in the history of mankind, like the fallen angel Lucifer, revolting against God and the earthly universe. For it is written that the Antichrist shall come to master all the kingdoms of the earth, and all the inhabitants of the earth worship him. Under the Antichrist, the Great Tribulation, the devil will tempt people and lead them to the battle of Armageddon.
Hermann Rauschning had played a role in Hitler's formation. He himself was a World War I veteran, lieutenant, wounded, awarded. Hitler didn't get on with people very well, but he and Rauschning got to be good friends. The man later became a writer.
In one of his books, Rauschning quoted Hitler, "One revolution results in the end of history." The world is in its crucial turn. We get to the axis of time. Some turn of the world is at hand, which you, the uninitiated, are unable to understand. We should exacerbate the inequality between people by making an impermeable shield. There will be masters and crowds of party men. Under them, the anonymous mass, once and for all. Still lower, the defeated foreigners, modern slaves. The new aristocracy, of which I can tell you now, will be at the very top. The path of Hitler's Germany was encircled by a fiery ring. Banished from the army, Colonel General von Fritsch remarked, "This man, Hitler, is the destiny of Germany and the end of it." The spring of 1938, invasion and incorporation of Austria into the Reich. On March 12th, Hitler ordered his troops to cross the Austrian border. Objective: annexation of Austria. The German command considered Hitler's plan a hell-bent adventure. Generals doubted Hitler would get away with it, like he did with the seizure of the Rhineland 2 years earlier.
Hitler told the Austrians that they would either accept German occupation or there would be war. It came so quickly that the German officers did not really have an opportunity to react negatively. They simply did as they were told. And as we all know, Hitler was successful. They did in fact bully the Austrians into essentially letting the German troops cross the border peacefully. In fact, in German it's called the Blumenkrieg. It means the flower war. As the German troops, as they crossed the Austrian border, were greeted with flowers, not bullets.
Not long before this, MP Winston Churchill received a psychological portrait of Hitler made by British intelligence. In privy, Churchill remarked, "Why can't we stop him? Why the fools in our government cannot see that Hitler is set for Vienna and the spear of fate. As soon as he gets it, his plans of establishing world supremacy will be turning from a theory into a most gory reality." Churchill's friends, as well as the majority of Europeans, knew nothing of the spear of fate and the corresponding legend. But for Hitler, the spear of fate was of great importance. (33 AD, Jerusalem). Jesus of Nazareth, escorted by Roman legions, climbed the mountain at the walls of Jerusalem. There he was laid down on a cross and nailed to it. Then the cross was fixed in the ground. It was the crucifixion of Jesus, who went down in history as the Son of God, Christ.
There was a centurion Longuet, who pierced Christ between the fourth and fifth rib with a spear to check if he was dead or still alive. This very moment he saw the light and had come. Later, on his spear, became known as a rarest Christian relic. According to legends, the spear brings luck to those commanders to whom it belongs. After the Byzantine emperors, it belonged to the German emperors, Henry the Fowler and Frederick Barbarossa. Then it had somehow found its way to Mamet, Dmitry Donskoy, and Kutuzov. Then to Austrian Field Marshal von Blücher, who had beaten Napoleon.
After Blücher's death, the spear was placed at the museum in Palace in Vienna. Autumn of 1909, Vienna. After moving to Vienna, 20-year-old Hitler, a connoisseur of art, went to the city museums. At the Hofburg Palace, he had an escorted tour. Through the glass case, young Hitler saw a spear with an unusually long tip. Later Hitler wrote, "There I heard the words that changed my life. There's a legend of the spear. Whoever calls it his own will rule the destiny of the world, to do good and evil." Now it dawned on me, it's a remarkable moment of my life. It felt as if I had already held it in my arm a century ago. What kind of madness had possessed my mind, stirring up a storm in my heart? It was very hot in the museum. I saw everything in a kind of a blur. Trembling all over, I was alone before the blurring figure of Superman. I gave him my soul to make it an instrument of his will. Hitler believed the vision was a message from above, sign of fate.
The legend read that after annexation of Austria in 1938, Hitler had stayed in Vienna just for one night. He went to the palace to spend 2 hours beside the spear. Then he ordered to move it to Nuremberg. Hans Oster's attempt, the summer-autumn of 1938, Berlin. Peaceful annexation of Austria made Hitler fabulously popular with the Germans. Crowds of admirers of the Celestial went in patriotic ecstasies. The Providence itself, Hitler said, had given me a safeguarding hand.
He didn't really believe in God. He believed in fate, he believed in destiny. Whenever he traveled, wherever he went, he would often flip a coin to decide where he would go. Whether he would take a train or a car, or take this road or that road, or walk down this path or that path. In World War II, he was a gambler, and many of the decisions he took was always on the throw of the dice.
Many decisions of World War II he made as a player, by dice throwing for the final decision. He'd made up his mind to capture the Sudeten region of Czechoslovakia before winter, where 3 million ethnic Germans lived. Like a giant werewolf, Hitler was running the scent of the mortally wounded world.
You had several people at the head of the German army very alarmed at Hitler's expansionist foreign policy. High-ranking generals in the German army understood that Hitler would stop at nothing to expand Germany, even if it meant starting a general European war. In 1938, we have the first conspiracy taking shape, with Beck, who is I would say, the figurative head of the conspiracy.
conspiracy was coordinated by a really interesting guy called Lieutenant Colonel Hans Oster, who was second in command at Abwehr, German military intelligence, under the tutelage of his superior, a man called Admiral Canaris. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Oster was one of many German army officers who looked upon him with apprehension. However, it wasn't until 1935, when the Nuremberg laws were passed, which essentially disenfranchised Jews and made them second-class citizens, in fact, stripped them of their citizenship, that Oster decided that Hitler was sublimely evil, morally right for them to take action against their leader, a leader to whom they had sworn a personal oath of loyalty, and convince them to participate in a plot that would remove Hitler from power.
Finally, he managed to coax them to get into conspiracy. The main obstacle now was Hitler's incredible popularity. After the coup, they would have to explain to the Germans why the coup was necessary.
They felt that the British would have to be informed because the British had, by the summer of 1938, in essence become the guarantors of Czech independence. By facing up to Hitler when he threatened to invade Czechoslovakia. And that declaration of war would then show to the German people what the conspirators knew, and that was that he was a warmonger. Oster and the conspirators knew that they would have about 48 hours. They could seize control. They would then use that as an excuse or as a justification for their action, saying, we removed Hitler because that was the only way we could stop Germany from being plunged into a war that Germany could not possibly win.
The only thing the conspirators had to do was to get along with the English. However, England thought that Hitler's removal from power was a German internal affair, refusing to conduct any secret negotiations.
The majority of the cabinet backed Prime Minister Chamberlain's policy of appeasement, which was a policy not to confront Hitler, but to try to make a deal with him. Now, the plot by September 1938 was actually quite widespread. It included not only virtually all the members of Abwehr, all the members of the German General Staff, it also included several key civilians.
And the plan was that they would raise a company of commandos to storm the Chancellery and arrest Hitler, put on trial. Oster was a pragmatist. He knew that Hitler held Germany in awe, and he knew that Hitler had a spell over the German armed forces, over all of Germany, and that the only way any coup could succeed would be if Hitler were killed. The secret deal between General Oster and the head of the commando force that Hitler would be killed.
By September 14th, 1938, the plotters were all set to go. The tip of the spear was to be the two divisions that were the Berlin garrison, commanded by General Witzleben. And they were actually barracked at Potsdam, which is a suburb of Berlin. They were waiting only for the trigger. And that trigger was Hitler had launched an attack or declared war against Czechoslovakia, and to be the British standing up to Hitler forcing Hitler to declare war.
O death, where is thy sting? Be sober, be vigilant. For your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Ye cannot drink the cup of the Lord, and the cup of the devils. Ye cannot be partakers of the Lord's table, and the table of the devils. On September 30th, it came to a crunch. The British PM, for the third time in 2 weeks, visited Germany to meet Hitler. The conspirators were expecting that Chamberlain, whatever happens, was not going to come to terms with Hitler. Hitler didn't know it was now due to be determined not just a matter of a small part of Czechoslovakia, but of his life and death. On September 30th, the Munich Agreement had been signed. The Prime Minister, Chamberlain, Hitler, Mussolini, the Italian dictator, and French Prime Minister Daladier signed the agreement permitting Nazi annexation of Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland. For fear of war, Britain and France, abandoning their ally, knelt down before Hitler. Again, Hitler won without war, and the British government believed that they did. Hopes that the blind regained sight had wrecked. The conspirators were stunned. The uprising became impossible, having lost its foundation. Order of the storming of the Reich Chancellery never came.
Hitler got everything he wanted. The conspirators were utterly and completely crushed. The surrender of the British and French to Hitler, that they really had no further opportunity to launch this conspiracy against Hitler.
On the same night that the Munich conference was occurring, the conspirators, Beck, Oster, Canaris, and others, sat around and tossed all of their plans into the fireplace.
At dawn, August 1st, began occupation of the Sudetenland region.
Hitler responded to the Munich Pact not as you would have expected with great joy and glee, but in fact with disappointment. Hitler had expected to stroll into Prague as the conqueror. He made a remark to one of his entourage, "That man has robbed me of my victory."
Hitler didn't want flowers. He needed blood, seas of blood. Hitler was obliged to bring sacrifice for the right to rule on earth.
The conspiracy kind of fell into a dormant state for the next couple of years. They continued to be in contact with each other, but needless to say, had to be very careful. They lived in a totalitarian police state.
It was time when one man is a man too. Maurice Bavon's attempt, the autumn of 1938. Hitler was a perfect target. For example, he used to ride standing in an open car.
He believed in destiny and astrology. All the same, he was a very cruel man. He had a streak of mystic and belief in providence in his character, thinking of him being guided by this providence to fulfill his mission.
Hitler believed he was temporarily immortal, while some believed they were destined to kill him. Even in his dreams, 20-year-old Maurice saw himself with a pistol in his hand, shooting at Hitler.
Vor uns liegt Deutschland! In uns kommt Deutschland!
Maurice was born in Switzerland. When he was a boy, he made up his mind to be a priest and missionary in one of the many French colonies. 16 years old, he entered the seminary.
Hitler was against all religions. In case of his victory, he was meaning to destroy Protestantism and Catholicism. Maurice, being a Swiss, was a personification of this internal protest. Maurice Bavaud wanted to shoot Hitler.
He felt that Hitler was the Antichrist. So Maurice Bavaud felt that he was on a mission from God. That it was his calling to go to Germany and try and kill Hitler. The problem was that he had no experience with a firearm.
On October 9th, 1938, Maurice arrived in Germany. In the pocket of his coat was a pistol Schmeiser bought the day before. On October 25th, he arrived at Berchtesgaden. This was Hitler's personal residence in the mountains. There he managed to find out that sometimes Hitler came out of the residence, yet to lay and to kill him was out of the question. So Bavaud decided to shoot Hitler in Munich during the celebration of Hitler's beer hall Putsch. It was a fortnight before the holiday. All these days, Bavaud was practicing shooting.
At first he discovered that he was not a good shot, so he used to go off into the woods by himself and target practice, and fire at trees and things like that. At first he started firing from about 50 feet away, but that proved rather fruitless. He was probably missed the trees entirely. It was only when he got to about 25 feet that he actually hit a tree. So that's what convinced him that he had to get within 25 feet of Hitler in order to...
On October 31st, Bavaud arrived in Munich. Just barely, he managed to get a complimentary ticket to the podium opposite the Church of the Holy Spirit. Maurice thought it was a good sign. Führer, in the head of the procession, was to pass by less than 10 yards from the podium. There was several days left. Maurice went to the lake near Munich. Renting a boat, he made paper boats, practicing again, this time shooting at the floating paper boats. He made 100 test shots and almost always hit the target. In the morning of November 8th, Maurice took place among guests behind the soldiers. There was the sound of drums and the roaring of the crowd. Then the column of the Nazi veterans appeared. Maurice stayed put, awaiting. Then he got a very big disappointment. Hitler, instead of being in the middle of the street, for some reason, was further away, opposite where Maurice stood, at a distance of approximately 15 to 20 meters. Yet he decided to shoot. Warped time got slower. He leaned forward, hand into the pocket, to pull out a gun. Suddenly a sea of hands as the Nazi crowd saluted, and he lost Hitler. Only for a second he saw him getting into the car. An idea of breaking through the SS to catch up and shoot Hitler appeared to be dismissed all at once. It was beyond reality. Hitler had left. The money ran out too. Bavaud decided to go back home to save some money. Then he'd return to Germany to finish his mission.
He hides on a train from Berlin to Paris. Conductor discovers him and turns him over to the local police. The police find the gun, which was illegal at the time, so they call him the Gestapo. He confesses.
The People's Tribunal made the charge, an attempt to kill Hitler. Hitler ordered that a report of the trial be given to him personally. When awaiting execution, Bavaud was allowed to send a farewell to his parents in Switzerland. Dear parents, I kept calm, and I will keep it until 6 a.m. tomorrow. Up until the very moment when they cut off my head.
After coming to power in 1933, Hitler ordered to build 19 guillotines. Can you beat it? As early as in 1933, Hitler was meaning to punish dissidents and potential opposition by the guillotine.
6 o'clock in the morning, flashed a blade of the guillotine. It remains a mystery why Hitler changed his usual way to move to the roadside. Why did the crowd to his left seem to him safer than the crowd on the right? Why, once again, did the fate have mercy on Hitler, not his next enemy? Swiss Maurice Bavaud. Noel Mason's attempt, April 1939, Berlin. Germany was preparing to celebrate the greatest event in the history of the state, Adolf Hitler's semi-centenary. The Fuhrer was inundated with congratulations and gifts. For present and experienced shooter and hunter, Noel Mason had prepared a first-class rifle with a telescopic sight and a muffler.
He was quite a remarkable person. British professional soldier, World War I veteran. He was an odd-looking man, too. He was maimed some time ago, fell off the horse, severely damaged his spine. Sometime after that, he had a car accident. He got a long neck, and due to the damaged spinal bones, his head was kind of dangling. He had that strange paraparetic gait, too. In the late 30s, he was a military attaché in Berlin.
Somebody had said that Mason McFarlane looked like a man who was walking through a storm, hunched forward all the time. And it turned out that Mason McFarlane lived in an apartment overlooking one of the main parade routes that Hitler would often go down in Berlin. He was an expert marksman, he had been a hunter, and he felt that he could easily assassinate Hitler with a telescopic scope on his rifle and a silencer.
Once at dinner, he told his friend Owen Butler, a reporter writing for the Times in Berlin, Hitler's death would result in the collapse of National Socialism and prevent the Second World War. Hitler's committed enough crimes and deserves to die. What about diplomatic problems, Butler said. Nobody's going to start the war for this reason, but as long as Hitler is alive, the war surely begins, Mason said in response.
He applied to the British government. They surely declined his offer. The refusal read, "To kill Hitler would be an unsporting conduct."
Mason was puzzled. How is that? Is the destruction of World War monger and unsporting conduct? As if the Munich Pact was a gentleman's agreement. From the windows of the British cabinet, one might already see the glow of a fire of World War II, but no one seemed willing to quench it. Instead, the Europeans were suggested to die gentlemanly.
Had the Mason been more adventurous a person, he might have destroyed Hitler without any legal permission. From a distance of 100 yards, he could do it even without any telescopic sight, too. Moreover, he could survive. With booming music and ecstatic howling all around, who could hear the shot? Nobody, ever. He could safely leave the scene, but he never thought of doing it without an order.
April 20th, 1939, the day of the long-awaited Führer's birthday. Mason was looking down at Hitler from the bathroom window. Not through a new telescopic sight, but through his old binoculars. Once again, Hitler was a lucky one. Attempt, Munich, September, summer, 1939. On a cold March day, two respectable men took a train from Switzerland to Germany. Ruth Warner introduced them not long ago. She worked for a cartographic firm, Sandor Rado. Rado was a part-time resident of GRU Soviet Military Intelligence Service in Switzerland. Truth Burner's code name Sonia was a radio operator and a sabotage specialist. Two respectable men, Michael Foote, alias Jim, and Bill Phillips, alias Len, had been recruited as GRU agents. Their task was to settle in Germany for future work. In Munich, Jim and Len were having lunch at Bavaria restaurant. Then, according to Len, something incredible happened.
Flustered murmur ran through the big room, and then a man passed. There was a woman with him. It was Hitler. The woman was Eva Braun. They passed, sat down at a table and ordered a drink. There were no guards. Hitler allowed himself to simply enter public places up until the war. He couldn't stand to have the guards nearby. He didn't really like that. He mystically thought that nothing can happen to him, that he was protected by Providence.
On receiving Len's message, Sonia reported there was a chance to approach Hitler in Bavaria, where he hunted, and assassinate him. Len developed a plan. He would make a special corset filled with explosives. He would wear it under his coat or jacket, and he would come close to Hitler and blow it up, and himself. He told Sonia Hitler's assassination, even at the price of his own life, would be the biggest reward for him. The request on the sanction to kill Hitler had been sent to Moscow twice. What was Stalin's decision? According to one version of the Rado group, they didn't get an answer. According to another, an answer came, but it was a categorical no. Stalin's agents, used to continuous risk, couldn't understand Moscow's position. The great leader, they thought, had to take out the proletarian sword and cut off Hitler's unclean head. News from Moscow shook the world by the end of the summer. The Soviet Union and Germany had signed a non-aggression pact. No one from Rado Group dared to voice their thoughts that this pact literally reminded them of the Munich Agreement. The circumstance had once again saved Hitler. George Elzer's assassination attempt, Munich, late autumn of 1939. George Elzer was a very good carpenter and a skillful watchmaker. In his free time, he enjoyed playing double bass.
He also believed that Hitler would plunge Germany and the rest of Europe into war. So Elzer was determined to assassinate Hitler for these reasons.
He acted as a true German. He firstly did a study. He visited all the places where Hitler could appear. He analyzed each location. The most suitable place was the beer hall. After Hitler came to power in 1933, he would gather here with his comrades in November. Hitler really liked Munich, mostly because of sentimental reasons. Here he spent his youth, where the Nazi movement started. Here he raised the beer hall putsch and became a natural hero. He was imprisoned, served a mild sentence during which he wrote his famous book, Mein Kampf. Munich was very dear to him.
Elzer was in Munich for the revolution celebration in 1938. He decided he will kill Hitler here, exactly in a year, on November 8, 1939.
I don't know of any other nation that would have such a conspirator. Elzer started working in a stone pit. It was hard work. He went there because miners were experts in dynamite explosives. He would carry out dynamite in empty shells in his clothing. Several kilograms was enough for an explosion to kill 10 to 20 people.
The beer house where the Fuhrer always gave speeches after a celebration was called Burger Braukeller and was situated in the center of Munich. Elzer noticed a stone column next to the tribune. Elzer decided if he puts the bomb inside the column, then the speaker would not avoid his fate. On September 1st, 1939, Germany attacked Poland. The very same day, Elzer sat down to work. He was to hollow out a deep shelf in the column and to hide the bomb there. Then he had to secure noise insulation to muffle down the mechanism ticking and to carefully cover it up.
He would come around 10 p.m., ordered a cheap meal and a big mug of beer, never two. And then he would hide in a side chamber, where he balled up in a corner, waiting for the beer house to close. It happened every day at 11:20 p.m.
After that, Elzer came out of his hiding place. He worked in total darkness, with a flashlight wrapped in a blue cloth. I wanted to avoid any noise. Any sound was very loud in the stillness of the empty room. Every 10 minutes, the water would automatically flush in the restrooms. I had to wait for those several seconds to use them for my work. Elzer kept working nights, hollowing out the shelf in the column, and in the morning went back home to work on the bomb. The bomb dial work, created by a skillful watchmaker, Elzer, was constructed in such a way that it could be triggered 6 days before the explosion, which was then to happen down to the minute. George Elzer spent 35 nights in the beer house. He was out of money, so he had to sell the double bass. And then the day came when everything was ready.
6 days before Hitler was scheduled to speak, he was able to get into the Burgerbraukeller, insert his bomb in the column, and leave.
The Hell machine was to explode on November 8th at 9:20 p.m. Approximately 10 minutes before the ending of the Fuhrer's speech and before his communications with the old partygoers. Hitler arrived in Munich on November 8th and, by tradition, went to the Burgerbraukeller after the parade.
Hitler said, if Providence wills, so he would die any second. And so in this case, Hitler explained that the Providence led him. Hitler started giving the speech.
For about an hour and a half. But for some reason, on this occasion, Hitler felt uneasy about something. For some reason, did not want to be in that building more than half an hour.
He didn't give a big speech. He gave a very short evaluation of the situation. He didn't even take a seat, didn't have his usual alcohol-free beer, and just left.
After Hitler's motorcade had left the building, the entire building exploded. 6 people were killed outright, about over 50 people injured. And this bomb had missed Hitler by, I think, about 13 minutes.
120 people were arrested in suspicion for organizing the attempt. Among those, by an absurd circumstance, was George Elser. He was detained at the border. He had metal details of unknown purpose on him and a postcard with the most well-known beer house in Germany, Berger Braukeller. Hitler attended the explosion victim's funeral. He was told that the organizer was detained and that he had confessed. Hitler didn't believe that Elser worked alone.
All those things he had to go through. No matter how hard they tried to make him admit of belonging to an organization, he kept repeating, "I was acting alone." He was tortured, he was hypnotized, thrown into a trance, but they got nothing.
In April 1945, a day before the Dachau concentration camp was freed by the Allies, almost all of the prisoners were killed. George Elser was one of them. Henning von Trescow's attempt, Smolensk, summer of 1943. It was the 4th year of the war. Information from the Eastern Front had a depressing effect on German leadership. The situation was coming from bad to worse. After the defeat at Stalingrad, the hope for victory were melting down. Hitler didn't want to see the obvious, but the subconscious let out the day horrors during the night. Hitler started having heavy attacks. Some of these were described by his former friend, writer Hermann Rauschning. Hitler woke up in the middle of the night screaming. He was calling for help. He was half laying on the edge of the bed and seemed to be paralyzed. He would shiver from horror from time to time, shivering so profoundly that the bed was also shaking. He was breathing so hard, it seemed he would suffocate any moment. Another time, Hitler was standing in the middle of the bedroom and kept looking behind himself in terror. "It is him, it is him. He came here," moaned Hitler. His lips were blue and he was sweating heavily. Suddenly he started to utter strange words, unclear sounds. He suddenly screamed. "There in the corner, who is it?" He was stamping on the floor and was howling madly. The defeat by Stalingrad didn't only have an effect on Hitler, but also sped up the degradation of the Hitler regime.
The crimes committed by Hitler and the Nazi were weighing me down more and more. I didn't believe in all that before, but now it was impossible not to. My unrest was growing. I became an officer not to serve a criminal regime, but to serve and protect my motherland. It was becoming more clear that Hitler was a terrible military leader.
It was impossible to strike Hitler as long as he was scoring one success after another. But by the spring of 1943, they had lost over 1 million casualties already. The German army had just suffered the most catastrophic defeat in its history at Stalingrad. On the Eastern Front, actually one Field Marshal Gunther von Klug, who was the Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Center, headquartered in Smolensk. His chief of staff was Colonel Henning von Tresckow. Tresckow was a committed conspirator, and he had recruited a number of officers around him who shared his views and were equally determined to kill Hitler.
In the evenings, after work, we would meet, play chess, and talk. It was quite clear at the time, without doubt, that the assassination must take place. There was no question, should we? It was, how? It was clear that Hitler had to be lured out of his headquarters in Wolf's Lair in eastern Prussia. An attempt was impossible there because of a great amount of guards.
There were actually two groups in operation at this time. There was the one in Berlin, with General Beck and Oster and Canaris, that group. They were the organizers of the coup. On the Eastern Front, for General von Tresckow, their plan was to kill Hitler. These two groups had to be brought together. To kill Hitler would not, Himmler probably would take over immediately, and they would not accomplish very much.
We decided the assassination must take place in the officers' club, where Hitler was planning to lunch and give a speech to the officers. From among the 30 volunteers to shoot Hitler, 8 officers were selected. We were to sit next to the table where von Kluge, Hitler, and Himmler would sit. On the signal, we were to stand up and shoot these two gentlemen.
They had to get Hitler to come and visit the troops on the Eastern Front. Hitler had become very much of a recluse by that point. He would scarcely venture to the Eastern Front to visit the troops. He probably had a premonition. But finally, they were able to secure a visit that Hitler would make to Smolensk.
Hitler flew from the Berlin spring into the Russian winter. In Smolensk, in the officers' club, tables were laid. 12 people were supposed to sit at the table with Hitler, including his confidants and Field Marshal von Klug. Officers had everything ready to shoot the Fuhrer, but then the unexpected happened.
Kluge refused to follow through. I will never allow to kill a person who sits at my dinner table. Though it was easy, Hitler wasn't armed. He was a target. Officers would shoot from the closest distance, and it was possible, but the marshal refused, and it didn't happen.
Striking but very German-like, von Tresckow was ready to kill Hitler, but as a true military man, he couldn't violate the order of his direct commander. Hitler's assassination did not take place.
That didn't really matter to Tresckow, because Tresckow had been able to secure through the Abwehr a British time bomb. Canaris had flown to Smolensk to deliver the time bomb to Tresckow. They were convinced this time bomb would work. They had tested it on Russian tanks. It had performed flawlessly.
They formulated a package that looked like 2 bottles of Cointreau, the square bottles of Brent. This was all wrapped up like it was a present. It was wrapped up in brown paper, then it was tied up securely with rope. So approached one of Hitler's military aides, who he knew flew on the same plane with Hitler. And he asked him if he could take a package back to Berlin with him. The package was a gift for a colonel on the general staff. And he didn't want to trust it to the regular mail for fear that they would be broken. The officer agreed. Just before the plane took off, it sets off the fuse. They gave him the package, and the fuse would explode in about 30 minutes.
In Berlin, conspirators had everything ready for the revolution. Loyal military units were waiting for a message that Hitler's plane exploded.
They went back to their headquarters and they sat around on the radio waiting for news the Fuhrer's plane had mysteriously exploded in midair. 30 minutes went by, an hour went by, finally 2 hours went by.
No news. Suddenly, a broadcast. Hitler's plane had landed safely back in Germany.
They received word that Hitler's plane had landed safely back in Germany. So the following day they called officer whom he had given the package to him, asked him if he had delivered the package yet. And he said no, he had it in his office. And Tresco asked him just to hold on to it, that he had given him the wrong package.
Rushed to Hitler's headquarters and retrieved the package. When he entered the room, he found the officer throwing the package up in the air, tossing it around, and it was actually a time bomb that hadn't gone off. Took the package, caught a night train to Berlin, and he started to unravel the package because he wanted to find out why this bomb hadn't exploded. As he examined the time bomb, he discovered that the acid fuse had eaten its way through. The firing pin had fired, but the explosive had malfunctioned. And out of 1,000 British-made time bombs, it turned out that this particular time bomb had failed.
Fate had spared Hitler once again. Rudolf von Gersdorf's attempt, Berlin, March 1943. They were walking in the cutting wind, throwing hail in their faces. Von Treschow asked Baron von Gersdorf, "Are you personally ready to commit this attempt?"
Colonel Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf was one of Tresco's people. Each year on Heroes Memorial Day, Hitler would go to the Berlin Armory and give a speech to ranking officers and then spend some time viewing captured enemy weapons. So Army Group Center was asked to send an officer to Berlin to accompany Hitler on the tour of the exhibit. Gersdorf volunteered for this. Gersdorf told him he was going to take Hitler out with him. Gersdorf explained that if he committed suicide and killed Hitler at the same time, it was a good way for him to go.
Several days before the Heroes Memorial Day, Canaris's people passed Gersdorf, the explosives. He recalled, "I couldn't sleep the night before. I was probably feeling as someone on death row, the night before execution."
Gersdorf decided to sacrifice himself. He put the explosives in his pocket. In the moment of general greeting, everyone raised their right hands. Heil Hitler. He did that too, and triggered the explosives in his pocket with the left one. He was doing self-sacrifice.
The conspirators expected Hitler to spend at least half an hour asking questions and looking at all these weapons. And it was a golden opportunity because he was accompanied by Goering, Himmler, and other top-ranking leaders of the Nazi regime.
When Hitler finished a short speech and entered the hall, Gersdorf followed. The explosion was to happen in 8 minutes. Gersdorf recalled, "I was very close to Hitler. The distance between us was no more than 1.5 meters. At last, Hitler's death was almost here.
Suddenly, Hitler did something that nobody expected. He raced through the exhibit.
He walked directly through it. Within 2 minutes, he was out the other end and gone. Never asked a single question. Von Gersdorff had tried to draw his attention to a few exhibits, but he seemed totally uninterested, which was very unusual because every year he always stopped and asked questions.
Outside, Hitler came up to handicapped heroes and was taking his time and shaking many hands.
This left Von Gersdorff standing there with 2 bombs in his pocket. We ran to the nearest men's room, locked himself in the cubicle, pulled the bomb out of his left pocket and disarmed it. Another time when Hitler just seemed to be, luck was definitely with him.
Klaus von Stauffenberg's attempt. Wolf's Lair, summer of 1944. By the summer of 1944, the Soviet troops started the offensive on all fronts. From the Karelian Isthmus in the north to West Ukraine in the south. The German troops started continuous retreat. The casualties were still counted in millions. On June 6, British and American troops opened the Second Front in the west. Mass disembarkation of the Allies started in northern France. Almost every German general knew that the war was already lost. The depleted German army couldn't handle 2 fronts at a time. The war had to be over. For this, Hitler had to be removed first. In 1944, Klaus von Stauffenberg led the conspiracy.
He then served in Russia, so he was sent to Africa. He was severely wounded. He had to have his right hand amputated, and he lost 3 fingers of his left hand and his left eye. It left him severely crippled. While he was convalescing in a hospital, he became convinced that God had spared him to liberate Germany from Hitler. In the summer of 1944, when he was appointed colonel and chief of staff to the Home Army, there was one very interesting occasion. For the very first time he laid eyes on Stauffenberg, Hitler jumped back all of a sudden. Just for a second, he had a premonition.
Count Stauffenberg reported to Hitler on the situation on the Home Army and the Reserve Army. He had access to Hitler, but was absolutely useless for an attempt. He was missing 1 hand and had only 3 fingers on the other. Even if he wanted, he couldn't pull out a gun, unlock and shoot it.
Conspirators already chose the place for another attempt. Hitler's quarters in Wolf's Lair in Rustenburg. The assassination plan was not different from the others, murder and the revolution in Berlin. In a few months, Stauffenberg did a colossal job in conditions of complete secrecy. 7,000 people were participating in the conspiracy. Over 1,000 were ranking officers.
And this was a terrible problem for Stauffenberg, because he could find no conspirators at the Wolf's Lair who were ready to do this deed. Stauffenberg would have to go to the Wolf's Lair himself to kill Hitler. And there were so many ifs, you know. What if he was stopped at the checkpoint? He had one thing on his side, is that nobody would expect a one-armed colonel would carry out this attempt.
The evening before the attempt, Stauffenberg was in church praying. To his brother's, where he spent the night. He read the Bible there. Christ was manifested that he might destroy the work of the devil and deliver those in bondage from judgment, death, and hell, that through death he might destroy him, that he had the power of death. And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a shoe of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Where, O death, are your plagues? July 20th came. It was unusually hot. Stauffenberg arrived at the wolf's lair.
He had a heavy briefcase. Inside it, he was carrying a British-made bomb. It was designed for a huge explosion. It was a very hot day, and it was decided to hold the meeting not in the bunker. Instead, it was to be held in Spears, the Minister of Armament's pavilion, for it was not so stuffy there.
The interior of the pavilion was a couple dozens of chairs and a long table with a massive wooden desk on thick legs. Hitler entered and sat by the table covered with maps. Then he leaned back, took the magnifier, and twisted it thoughtfully.
With his time bomb activated, so Stauffenberg now knew that he had only 10 minutes to get to the Führer conference room, stay 1 or 2 minutes, excuse himself, clear the conference room, get out of the wolf's lair in time before all the security cordons were shut down. This amazing sang-froid. He was able to calmly walk towards the conference room, got in, he greeted Hitler, took his place by the side of other officers.
The briefcase with the bomb was less than 1.5 meters away from Hitler. Stauffenberg stayed for a couple of minutes, then showing the need for an urgent call, exited and walked fast to his car.
He went about a few hundred yards away and he stood by, and then there was a tremendous explosion and the conference hut blew up. Stauffenberg, seeing the wreckage of the conference hut, was convinced that no one could possibly have survived inside. And he saw a body being carried out on a stretcher. The car sped down the mountainside, arrived at Rassenburg airfield. They got into the Fiesler-Storch plane and took off.
In 3 hours, he entered the Army Reserve Office. Lead conspirators were waiting for him. Stauffenberg said, "By all human odds, Hitler is dead." However, events in the wolf's lair did not develop by human odds.
And everything would go as it was supposed to, but for a circumstance that saved Hitler. As I said, it was decided to move the meeting to a small pavilion. Imagine that explosive in a closed space. It destroys everything. And here it just sweeps away the walls and is less effective. Someone had moved away the briefcase, had put it at the opposite side of the table. Hitler's behavior was essential in this context. Hitler bended over the map. He shifted his weight on the table, which saved him. If he was standing up or sitting down, he would have died.
When Hitler was taken out of the wreckage, his suit was straps and his face was smoke black, but he wasn't hurt that much and was coldly calm. 12:30 p.m., half an hour after the explosion, he met with Mussolini, who had arrived from Italy. In another 30 minutes, he was showing the scene of the attempt.
This drama of July 20th in Berlin ended around midnight when Fromm sentenced the 4 leading conspirators to death. Colonel von Stauffenberg betraying the German government. They were led out into the courtyard. A shooting party of the German troops was assembled. It was nighttime now, and the truck lit up the wall, and they were executed by firing squad. Their bodies were taken away and cremated and scattered to the winds.
Additional investigations were carried out. The guilty were punished in a most ruthless way. Mass arrests and trials were taking place. In the process of the investigation, the scale of the resistance was revealed, its roots traced back to the year 1938.
Among those, as I knew, only I and my brother weren't arrested. I was sure that we were about to get arrested, and I was afraid to betray my friends if tortured. Before that, I had always had potassium cyanide in my pocket. After the failure, it became clear that one of the central figures of the resistance is von Tresckow. He also understood that it would surface soon enough. Tresckow was on the Eastern Front at the time, and the next day after the failure, he came to the front line, exited his car, and having walked to the very edge of the front line, he blew himself up with a grenade. He left a letter. I hope that God, as Abraham asked him not to destroy Sodom, if 10 righteous people were found, on our account, will spare Germany. Neither of us can complain about our deaths, for one's moral value is determined by the fact whether he is ready to sacrifice his life for his beliefs. The participants' execution started. 7,000 people had participated in the conspiracy. Hitler ordered a violent execution. A metal wire was stretched in a big hall. Hooks from the cattle plant were hanged on it. Hooks for holding killed cattle. Participants of the conspiracy were hanged on the hooks by their chins. What a painful death it must have been. I was still waiting for the arrest. News on arrests, trials, and suicides were broadcast every day. This was not the most terrifying thing, but the thought that Hitler will fight back until the last stone of Reichschancellery in Berlin, and millions of soldiers in death camps, prisoners, would die. But it was clear that there will be no more attempts, because everyone who planned the attempts was arrested, and most of them were dead already.
Adolf Hitler, the only person among 4 billion people on the earth, was an insuperable obstacle to the end of the bloodiest war in human history.
It's amazing when you think about all the attempts on Hitler's life, especially by the members of the German army. These are the men best equipped to carry out the assassinations. Don't know what it was that was protecting Hitler against this, because at any other time in history this would have worked. At least the first or second time they would have gotten their target and taken him out. But with Hitler, there was an extraordinary amount of good luck.
I had a feeling that the devil was protecting him. He had a guesstimate for danger. So many attempts on his life, but he always escaped. Hitler said he was being protected by the Providence, but I think it was the devil, not Providence, if Providence is God. I think he was at one with the devil. There is no other explanation. Otherwise, he couldn't have escaped more than 4 dozen attempts.
But Providence and fate, through all the failures and defeats, was leading the Soviet army towards Germany, towards Berlin, towards victory. Hitler had carefully carried out his evil mission. He had put human civilization on the edge of the abyss, the name of which was fascism, the darkest side of humanity. Now he was defeated and had to leave. According to the traditional version, Adolf Hitler shot himself with his own gun on April 30th, 1945.